And I'm reading what people are writing in chat. There is a number of them who are basically lacking in the mental capacity. I don't think we'll win with these people. Like some of them are saying, let's say this, Arestovych needs to go to the front because he's a lieutenant colonel and he's a Moscow spy. He needs to be punished, needs to be sent to the front. So they want to give me lives of 3,000 patriots, a battalion or some other detachment, to a Moscow spy. Do you guys have brains? Right? And the way one person does it is the way the person does everything. Like the way you're writing these comments under our streams is the way people, many of them think. And that's not enough for brain power. And pathos is not a good replacement for brains. Those people who cannot discuss, who cannot dispute, who cannot logically deduce ideas and understand the reality. It is difficult to win with these people. And a collective build to the West on something like Yalta-Potsdam Conference could sound like this. As a joint statement, guys, we understand that the expansion of the West to the east of Europe was a big mistake. The expansion of NATO led to negative consequences, such as this war. And it was not Arestovych, it was Kenyon who mentioned that. It is your right to expand NATO, right? You have the right to do that, but Russia responded to that with a big European war and is eager to continue that war. And now it seems like there is some escalation, and Russians are discussing that they may attack a European country other than Ukraine. Are you ready to fight to your death for that? Because Russia suggests that they will, and they have that in their propaganda till nuclear ash. And if we die, everybody dies. Are you ready to fight them tooth and nail? Because every project is only worth as much as you're eager to back it up with your actions. And Russia answered with their action to NATO expansion to the east. And you may despise, you may refute these interests, you may don't like and laugh at these interests and consider them biased, but they sat on tanks and came to our backyards for that. Are you ready to do the same thing? They are. Are you ready to fight physically for that with your hands and legs? On a pistol distance, not with jets and tomahawks, but like a real warfare, shooting at each other from 5 yards and throwing grenades, or just freeze your fingers to amputation, sitting in a trench through winter. If you are not ready to do that, then all your system and all your arguments are complete rubbish. They can be perfectly outlined by the laws of British debates. You can get a reward in Harvard for the brilliant logic, but if you're not ready to fight your opponent from that distance, that's rubbish. And Russia is showing that they can, and the West is showing that they can't. And now we have to consider Russian ideas and what the West can respond to that question from Russia, to that proposition of war. What does the West do? Well, the West supplies 77 American details to Russian Kinzhal Dagger ultrasonic missiles. This is their answer to Russians' retort to NATO expansion. And before running at Arestovych with pitchforks and torches, dear Ukrainians, think a bit more. Why is that being said this way? I understand many of you are not comfortable using your brain power, but please do. There is a framework that I'm indicating at. It's much more comfortable to write and accuse your opponents and call them names. But if you think logically, can your country provide enough support to your visuals? Can your allies, or by the way, not allies, Minister of Defense of Germany said, you're a partner, you're not an ally. Do you think they will be supporting your country? And when they know that Ukraine will die if they don't help, they are still discussing whether to help or not. Do you think they will support your pathos and your emotional appeal? Back when I was researching Ukrainian nationalism by deep diving method, I attended one meeting, and one guy was holding a placard there, Ukrainian language or death. And I came to him and asked, and what if death? Have you considered this option? Like, seriously, because maybe not. Maybe it's not going to be Ukrainian language all over. And the person said, yeah, I am ready. I'm ready to sacrifice my life for that. And he's now actually fighting on the front, so he is answering with his actions for his systems of belief. Are the rest ready to do that? Why they're not then going to the conscription sites, and why they're not joining to the front? They can post a picture on social media, but when we're talking about bank services being limited or council services being limited, consulate, and that's not even the main thing. The main part of the whole riddle is that we are not self-sustainable. We do not have enough arms to manufacture to sustain our fight. We're still utterly dependent upon the West that is making decisions, should we live or should we not live. So when perhaps our society comes down a bit and stops believing in the fairy tales that one day King Kong will awaken and will show the bear how things work, perhaps we should be changing our angle of action. Perhaps we should be asking questions of the West that actually was provoking quite a bit part of this war. And it's a collective responsibility of everybody, but on the West as well. And then the West, when it came to the actual war, they did not really come to fight it. And then there is another thought behind it, that we need to defend our own interests. Ukraine needs to defend its own interests, not Western interests, not Russian interests, our own interests. If we were thinking about our own interests, we would be probably following the path of Azerbaijan, rather than the path that is appealing to Washington or Brussels. And then might as well compare how does Azerbaijan fight its war and how do we fight our war. Alexei, many things that you're talking about are confirmed by publications in the Western media that I'm reading through the agenda. Nikolay, I'm in that context. I'm here in the midst of these discussions that you get just the echoes of in the publications via the Western media and other. And I'm here, and I'm trying to bring it into the discussion field in Ukraine, but I'm being pushed out because Arestovych is supposedly a Russian spy and talking Moscow rhetoric and all. I'm only conversing and converting to our language what is being discussed in the West. That's it. Time magazine, American well-known, world-known publication, wrote this week that the slow yes of Biden's administration doomed Ukraine. This is the title. And the story goes about the strategy of a slow yes of America and NATO, even though it was directed at supporting the interests of the United States, still was not good enough to support Ukraine and essentially doomed it to suffer and face consequences that we're discussing now. Will that answer change? Will new weapons be allowed? Will the progress be still slow walked in answer to bloody requests that Ukraine keeps asking them about? All right, Nikolay, let's use our head, for example, right? And play the scenario when our allies decided to give us some weapons that allow us to stabilize the front line, right? To hold. So we are holding the front line, sitting there. We have enough javelins. Other systems, maybe F-16s are flying somewhere. Every day people are dying, but neither of the sides can move and change it. And what will be happening in Ukraine in this fight, inside Ukraine, in this fight of potentialities? Will our economy improve? Will our government come back to its senses and turn to its people? No. We'll stop eating each other, devouring every opposition, and suspecting everybody to Moscow as spy? Our stationary front really doesn't give us much in the long run. Stationary front will lead us to devouring each other internally. Inside Ukraine will end up all the opposition and will be bickering heavily between the political forces, trying to figure out who is Moscow spy or who is for the country, who is for the government, and who is against your views. I give us a year in these conditions. And the only exit that will change this situation in that scenario would be armaments that will really change the situation on the front, that would allow us to defeat Russian army. But does anybody see that we have this chance of getting these arms? Very few people who believe that still, right? And for those who still believe, we are just repeating once again, the West tried to restart its military-industrial complex. They tried to deliver the arms, and they physically are incapable right now. They physically are incapable of supporting us to the degree that we request them about. And I'm only suggesting our viewers to start thinking. Like in chess, everything begins with analysis, right? You look at the chessboard and you start to analyze the situation. So just look at this chessboard. Not even, let's remove all the suggestions about new collective security systems. Let's just make a step back and just evaluate the situation, our real position, and also the real position of Russia, which is also not doing that well, to say the least. And that's it. One moment here. I just appeal to our viewers to use the head. You don't need to be genius to be Kissinger, great geopolitical specialist. Just turn on the logic and look at the board. And I turn to our Ukrainian citizens, compatriots, do not vote for Arestovych. Just turn your head on. I'm not appealing as a voting campaign or anything. Just turn your head on and look at the board. The magic of turning the logic on actually is worth everything else. The world becomes a little different. Then you start seeing different chances and perspectives. And until you have turned it on and reviewed the situation, you don't really have a path forward. All right, next one. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the United States was giving a press conference on the 20th of December, and he said the following, that United States has a plan of development for Ukraine in the future, and it doesn't have more support, more monetary support, and the continuous mode. The goal of the United States is to make sure Ukraine is self-sustainable. And the United States is helping Ukraine to develop in the areas of democracy, military, and economy. And we're working also on overcoming corruption. That sounds good, right? The way that he put it, that the United States is helping Ukraine to become strong, independent, rich, live within its means, defeat the corruption. This is right, a good set of goals for Ukraine. Perhaps the United States is doing something good. I have three uncomfortable truths to this message. First is his own words, that they're not going to give additional monetary support, right? Second is that Ukraine came to the current moment, to this war, in such a situation and such economic and societal situation that it cannot stand and fight this war, the war of that scale by itself. Simple situation. It takes a lot of gas to get to Odessa, 400 kilometers, right, from Kiev. And you only have 5 gallons of gas. We can be genius of driving. We can be the best driver on the planet, but you cannot get to Odessa on 5 gallons of gas. We did not reform our economy. We did not prepare militarily to this war. That was actually inevitable. And you can watch my videos from 2019. We have not done anything. We needed 40 liters of gasoline, and we only have 2. But you cannot get to your goal on that capacity, on that tank. That only can be done with the aid of the West. And what is the West telling us? We are not going to increase monetary support to Ukraine, right? We're not going to increase that line of budget. And it's not Arestovych who is sending this message, it's Blinken from Washington. That, again, sarcasm, white gentleman. And we unfortunately cannot pull this war through in our current capacity. We just don't have enough gasoline, like in that example, right? We don't. The other one is that, the other asterisk is that United States have plans for everything. There is a plan where Ukraine is a beautiful and self-sustainable country and a democracy, and there is another plan where there is no Ukraine. There is no independent Ukraine. And they're just not voicing this plan for us. They have a stronger thought of planning than Ukraine or Russia does. You know, our inheritance of Soviet Union, we go with one plan, and when it utterly fails, then we start thinking about the other. Until we totally fail, then it's time for us to reconvene and regroup, just like Russians did after the beginning of this war. And the West, they do have different plans. They have plans for Ukraine being a gray zone of conflict, and a plan where Ukraine is great, sustainable, democratic country. Problem is, Ukraine cannot get to the second one by itself. Under pressure of war and with the dwindling Western support, the chances for us to turn into a flourishing state are nil. And we're choosing between a very bad scenario and a somewhat bad scenario. There's not even a mid-ground scenario available on the table already. And about another statement by Kirby that it's too early to talk about transferring to Ukraine frozen Russian assets. I will not be talking about this specific request, but we talked to a lot of allies and partners about how Russia would be, what Russia would be after this conflict, and what should be done to restore and restructure Ukraine in the long perspective. But right now, we're not at the point where we will be discussing or ready to discuss these specific actions. So I'll tell you one more thing, Nikolay. Those 300 billion of Russian frozen assets that they're discussing to send to Ukraine or not, they're actually using them. They're actually in their financial system. They're not literally frozen. They're being invested. They're earning money on it. And they're not transferring this money to us. Norway and I think some other countries said that we'll be paying you the earnings from those frozen assets. So that's what we're getting. I think this is a total bullying. And let's, dear viewers, let's comment that in the chat or in the comments to this video. How would you name it? What's the proper title for such activity? They've done everything to let this war start. Didn't come to fight. Froze Russian assets, could have transferred them to Ukraine. Not doing it. They're just making money on them. And at best, we're getting percentage of that. Give me a better description. Give me a better title for this. Let's give it a beautiful name. What translating that to the simple language, I did a lot for you to quarrel with your neighbor. I promised complete support. I did not come to the fight. I gave you a little bit of money because the neighbor that you quarreled with was keeping his money in my bank. So and when you come to me asking, hey, can you give me the money so I can fight him? I understand you cannot come, but at least let me do that. And then I tell you, no, I won't give you this money. I'll give you some percent of what I'm making on it. How do you name it? Right, I don't know how to name it. Let's our viewers call it. And then people in Ukraine are attacking me asking, Arestovych, how can you even pose the question about collective responsibility to the West? How can you appeal to the shining city on the hill? Well, ask them, where are those 300 billions of frozen Russian assets that we should be probably using to defend ourselves, right? Where are these money? And if you're not getting it, yeah, you're just not getting the reality of this situation. And yeah, just wait, Nikolay, we're not even at the lowest of that curve. All right, everything says that the war in Ukraine is a very important topic in the United States because Washington Post actually removed the tab of war in Ukraine from their site. And using some archive software, you can see that this tab actually existed, and they removed it. So it turns that from their point of view, this is more like a frozen conflict now, like a borderline, somewhere outlier conflict for the internal user. Koля, they're shooting movies about civil war. Already two. Oh, the second one? There was one before this one. So what I'm saying is that when the real wise part of our Ukrainian society will start getting a hold of the reality, the ones who are seeing Moscow spies everywhere, they will see the situation when the voting in United States will commence, getting close to the actual elections of 24. If there'll be any conflicts spilling out in the streets, if there'll be stronger problems within the United States, then those people will start seeing that's what's happening with our potential partners. And yeah, this week, I think the court in Colorado already came with a suggestion to exclude Donald Trump from the list from the voting ballot in 2024. And as a response to that, 3 Republican states, Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, are preparing their laws to remove Biden from the voting list, from the ballot. So yeah, you see United States, actually states themselves addressing federal level issues. And they're taking on their own, making their own steps. So you think the system is falling apart somewhat? It actually started some of the dangerous curves when they started using the judicial branch to attack Trump. It was never used, judicial branch was never used to attack presidency. And de facto, America is basically a collection of 50 different countries. At times, the states are so different that it almost looks like you come to a different country, go into another state. And now these states trying to set new rules, right? Figuring out whom to put on a ballot, whom to not put on a ballot. This is separatism. And there is a shadow of civil war looming behind that. And these decisions, they start to creep out into the open now. So what about help to Ukraine? They don't know how to help themselves. Once again, use a little bit of your brain and look at the situation. All right, let's also take a look at Europe quickly. Bild created a bunch of information splashes. Ukrainian leadership in private communications is describing situation differently than in public messages. Ronsheimer is writing that those of Zelensky's aides who were talking not while being recorded, who were being talking off the record, they were discussing issues with serious problems with munitions and resources. And they see serious concerns, they express serious concerns that Ukrainian army can even go into offensive. It doesn't mean that Russian army will crumble the front and will break through, but it definitely looks like, and as the author writes here, that the situation in the long run looks to favor Putin, and the stories from the front are devastating. And it seems like the United States will not be able to support Ukraine more in this coming 2024, and Europe, including Germany, will have to take more responsibility on their shoulders to support Ukraine. I did pay attention especially to the note about the situation on the front that is really bad. And we are communicating with a lot of our fighters on the front, right? So these news are coming, they're seeping through into Europe, and now they're starting to write about that same side of problem. So do you think it can affect Europe? It can change communication from the official Kiev? The story, that part of a story where they say that out in the public, they're not saying what they're saying off record. Otherwise, nothing will help. So what does he mean? At least he means that we started to lie. We lost our moral advantage that we had at the beginning of this war. Because when you start lying on the record and then you're saying different things off record, this is a signal to our European partners, a strange one, that would pose more questions. Is it worth helping these people? Because as for Ukrainian society, we figured, they're giving us 3 different versions of mobilization, actually 5 different versions of how this mobilization will unfold. 3 from Minister of Defense, 1 from advisor to the president, and 1 from the congresswoman. And now the Western press is also seeing that duality. And Germany, that will have to bear a lot of responsibility on its shoulders. And their correspondent is basically pointing out, saying, look, off the record, they're saying different things, not what they're speaking publicly. And now let's see if the Europe will be able to support us if United States exclude themselves from that action. And this is the wet dream of European right and also of American isolationists to get America out of European dealings. First of all, they don't have enough money, or they're not going to give us enough. And even if at some point they would give $300 billion, just like they did to Greece without war when they just had a crisis, we cannot shoot euros from tanks, from mortars, from artillery systems. We need to load shells. They were going to produce 1 million. They produced 300,000. They added 150 somewhere, I strongly suspect, in South Korea. And that's all we got, half of, roughly, of what was promised. But we cannot shoot with money. You need to take an 80-pound iron, shove it into another tube, and shoot it in the direction of an enemy. So our allies who are failing to produce, or whose capacity to produce maybe for 15 days of large-scale war, of the artillery shells worth. They were just not ready. They cannot restart their equipment, their machinery fast, and that means only one thing: they will not be actively fighting in this war. They technically do not have this capacity. Perhaps later, eventually, when Russia will attack Poland, they will start thinking about, oh, we indeed need to restart that. But to restart, you need 2 or 3 years. So they won't have the time. It'll be much simpler. Russia found a civilizational weapon that we already told is called urbanism. And they're not even going to attack physically the countries, I think. They will be giving special considerations and special concessions to certain political powers that they like in this country, and they will be giving certain support to the countries and to figures there who will be playing with them along with their politics. And then there is Fico and the others. Barrel came out and he outlined the situation that there is a right turn in Europe, and there'll be a lot of right fractions coming to European Parliament. People want to stop this war, and many of them are pro-Russian. And here's the other side of reality that we're facing. All right, the problem is not only with that they don't have enough 155 and 152 caliber artillery shells. Yulian Robke, a military reviewer of Bild, is writing that my contacts in Ukrainian military are telling me that self-propelled artillery systems manufactured by the West are not really working well. Very often they break during the active engagement, and one of the problems is that the West was not planning for such an active use of the systems. Western self-propelled howitzer systems, they are not created for large-scale war, only for short missions. Nikolay, most of the Western armies, probably excluding United States, but most of the European ones, they were preparing only for police or short-term operations. They lost this capability to wage a large-scale warfare. The simplest example is the way they created a legal system to preclude transfer of military troops across Europe, because one needs to get so many permissions that it just becomes unfeasible to move troops around Europe. So essentially, the military turned into the armies for police operations. And Europe is not ready on the legislative level, on the industrial level, on the psychological level, and on the material level. They're not ready for such a war. And they're failing to catch up with it. The war is already going, and in order to prepare that, they need to first change their agenda and then throw a lot of resources in rebuilding the whole military-industrial complex. So they're not ready. And Russian army is also initially started this war as a military operation, right, as a special operation in Ukraine. And what happened with it? Yep, utter defeat at the first stage, exactly. Russian cadre military was completely destroyed at the beginning of this conflict, and they completely failed with their ideation. It's just Russia has a long will, and they clenched their teeth and started rebuilding the system and started fighting in the Soviet style against military police armies. The result will not be liked by the armies that are built to conduct military police operations. So, Alexei, it means that they also need to rework a lot of these howitzer systems and self-propelled artillery. And do you think it's enough? 2 to 3 years? Well, look, even Americans, they give us M777s, right? The instruction says it's a very delicate equipment. You need to be making not more than 5 shots per minute. Normal fire support is 10 to 12 shots per minute. Otherwise, you do not stop the flow of enemy attacking your positions. And these howitzers fail when they're being abused like that. They were not built for this. When they were shooting at mujahids in Afghanistan or ISIS, you don't need those 12 shots per minute. And that's when they start to break. Oil, targeting, wheels, other things. There were times when 2/3 of them in Ukraine were incapable of conducting any warfare. Plus, Russians, they're actually from time to time shooting them with their Landsats, with their FPVs, and from time to time these machines break. So a big part of what we use now artillery-wise is old Soviet guns. And for us, the main problem is not in the production of 155 millimeter shells. 122, 152 millimeters are more actual for us, and repairs of those Soviet guns as well, because that's our native calibers. These are artillery systems of the old times that are mostly used now. And some factories still have some capacity to fix and to produce those. In Ukraine, we also broke the system of trade schools. We don't have those schools anymore. There are now colleges and universities, right? I read a report yesterday about an index of human capital, rather interesting one. I can show you a couple slides. In 2012, Ukraine, at its education level, was on par with Czech Republic, Poland, and South Korea. Here it is. I'm bringing it up just a sec. Here's the index of human capital. And we were part of that circle. And now let's look further. Here we were 2012, the index of human capital and everything. This is our human capital rank. This is the place of Czech, Poland, South Korea. And now let's look at the 22nd. And here we're dropping in every parameter. See, from 30s and going down to 90s and 50s. We only are okay in digitalization because of DIA, and that's about it. This is sentencing to what we've been doing, right? So in order to bring up our manufacturing capability, we need to recreate trade school systems and make it prestigious that you are working on making these shells. It's difficult in Ukraine. And now imagine on the West, catch all those hipsters with pumpkin latte and put them to the production facilities. These are your perspectives. So after this context, does it dawn on any of you viewers about the outlook for this war and the discussion about the collective security system? Perhaps it's timely. All right, I want to bring another thing. A quote from Minister of Defense of Czech Republic, Chernokova, who is saying that they are tied with their laws and Russia has an advantage. I'm sorry we cannot adapt that Russian system here. So a question to her sounds like this. How is it possible that the West, as the richest bloc in the world, cannot overtake economically weaker Russia in a way to balance the powers on the battlefront? What is lacking? Money, will, political support? The answer is no. I think we are tied with our laws, conventions, and international rules, because unlike Russia, we are following the law. When here in Czech Republic we announce a tender for military equipment, it takes about 2 years for anti-monopoly committees, courts, and other systems to let it go through the system before the production commences. And that doesn't solve the problem we face with Russia. And it may seem that we're limiting our aid, it just lasts forever. We're not limiting anything, it's just, unfortunately, a very slow system. So it seems like the West is worse than Russia due to their good laws. Maybe it makes sense to get rid of these good laws. All right, again, this is not Arestovych talking about that. This is Minister of Defense of Czech Republic, who is saying that the West is ineffective compared to the pace that is required of them. Is she also Russian spy? A question to our Ukrainian leadership. And she hasn't even added about the unions, because if you really want to produce enough shells, you need to start the B shift, the C shift, evenings, nights, weekends. And how much will that shell cost if you produce it in this format? What will happen to the shares of these weapons companies? Because there'll be also financial instruments involved, all the unions, and for the employees who are working there. So all that political economic system of the West is really not ready for a big war. Just understand that they cannot produce an artillery shell or shells in a required quantity because their legal system doesn't allow them, the bureaucracy doesn't allow them, and they're not ready to forfeit or change it because all these financial systems are actually integrated into providing the overall stability and benefits and payments and social payments and other things in the West. And if they decide to change that or break that, they might be facing a risk of serious conflict around it, all the way up to a civil war. So when I'm saying the West was caught with its pants down, it was not just that, it was also in a very bad posture with the pants down. And it's not just Arestovych who is saying that, it's Minister of Defense of Czech Republic, which is one of the main ammo hubs production for NATO. All right. Let's finish the story with Bild. One of the European intel services is suspecting that Russia may attack Europe in winter of 25 on the border between 24 and 25, when the United States will be somewhat without a leader in a situation of a change of presidency, or perhaps there'll be more contested elections there happening, and when the United States will not be able to join Europe quickly, or if they do, they'll come with some delay. And Bild is suggesting that it'll be the time when Biden or the current president will be replaced with the next president, be it Biden again or be it a new candidate. So this is one estimation by one of the European intel services. Do you think it could be Baltic countries or Poland or Finland involved? Frankly, Nikolay, I see only one scenario where Russia needs or can attack. It's to push the West further. It's basically when the West will be ready psychologically to provide some concessions to Putin's regime, they might add additional force, additional push to re-emphasize their meaning that they're ready to fight and the West is not ready to fight this big war. So they could nudge on the 5th article of NATO, attack one country, doesn't matter really which, and say, hey, so if you're ready to fight, invoke your 5th article, 5th chapter of NATO agreement, and they can bring their submarines, their nukes, and everything else as well, and say, we are ready and Belarus is ready. Do you think NATO will start nuclear war or launch 11,000 Tomahawks? With what I know now, I'm of a strong opinion that NATO will surrender or will refuse to fight, regardless of what's going to happen in the White House. And I want to quote Kennan here, not myself, the architect of Cold War. The West, by expanding NATO to the east after 1991, will provoke the war with Russia and will likely lose it. The only option when the West can win this war, if it changes its consumption psychology and capitalization psychology to a psychology of, okay, if we got a foe who wants a nuclear war, we'll fight that foe, and becomes that good old West that it was back in 1945, and that it was back even in Reagan times. If you're an axis of evil, we're ready to fight with you till utter destruction. If you're threatening us in a nuclear flame, to burn down to ashes in a nuclear flame, well, you'll burn in the same flame as well, because we have values to fight for. And I don't see any other options for that resolution, really. What the West is focusing now on what? On the green agenda, on that supposed social services or for everybody, or a green billion that lives in good conditions in the West, but everybody else around doesn't. The West doesn't really have a picture of the world it's building. What is so precious in the world they're building that you can die for? When the first time it was ISIS that made a proposition for the West to die over their values, and the West, collective West, had to fight together, join together, and those ISIS fighters just had machine guns and rifles, and they were running out there. So the whole West had to gather together to defeat it. And now we have Russia, we have Belarus, we have North Korea, we have Iran, China is somewhere there. So what if there is a next war? And the West is in the condition where they can win one war with aviation, precision, armaments, and all. But in order to win that one war, they need to abandon 2 other wars. So a question, will they choose Israel over Ukraine? Or Ukraine over Lithuania and Poland? Do you really want to be in that choice? Probably not, right? This is not a good choice to be in. Poland, Rzeczpospolita, made a research. What would Poles do if there would be a war, if Russia would attack Poland. Every third Pole said they will relocate, they'll leave the country, or relocate from the area under attack. Only 15% confirmed that they would go join the army, 21% said they'll do volunteer activity. And perhaps looking at these percents, about 16% of Poles eager to fight, maybe it's not too bad. Nikolay, they need to be armed, right? 15% of Poles is 5.5 million people. Okay, that's a good size, but what do you arm them with if they cannot produce shells, artillery shells? Even if you have 70% of Poles eager to fight, what do you arm them with? I'm not even talking about the moral side of it, that their beautiful and beloved Poland, only 15% are saying they're ready to defend it, right? That's not too high of a percentage. But in reality, Russia doesn't need a war with any European nation. Russia already was there. They already stifled the mutinies in Hungary, in Czech Republic, in Czechoslovakia, in other places. They don't like it. It costs money and it takes a lot of effort to do that. They are of an opinion that they can use Georgia and Hungary scenario rather effectively, and European Union can still not find an easy way to deal with Orban when one party in one country can spoil the collective strategy that was worked by all the members of European Union. And European Union, still, they have not came together to standardize the electric outlets over 18 years. So you think seriously that these people are capable of winning and standardizing and winning the big war? Russia doesn't even need to fight. They'll just buy them. And I'll remind you the words of Vladimir Lenin: capitalists will sell the rope that will hang them on if their margin will be 300%. And that's exactly what's happening. Minister of Defense Pistorius is demanding Germany to be better prepared for war. But according to the poll, very small percent of Germans are ready to use arms to defend their country. This is according to Stern. 61%, according to this poll, would not be ready to defend their country in case it is attacked militarily. And the share of those who would not be defending the country under any circumstance with arms is 40%, which is twice bigger than in the same poll of 2022. So it seems that in the last year and a half, Germany was leading such information politics that demoralized their own people. Right, it indeed demoralized. And of course, the general mood in Germany is understandable, right? War is horrible, it's bad that Ukrainian kids are dying, but we do really like gas for 15 cents a cubic meter. Which war, Nikolay, are you talking about? When they see Wagner on Russian tanks, they will probably surrender, a good chunk of them. And those who won't, who will resist and will fight, they will not have much arms to fight with. Because Germany, the motherland of one of the biggest and best tanks in the world, Leopard 2A6, it took them 6 months to restart production for shells for this tank. 6 months. Even if now they just listened to our show, they became horrified, they decided to break their economic, social model, and they're not going to be the country of being good and social and equitable for everybody. And they all of a sudden decided to start up their production. It'll take about 5.5 years for them to be ready for a big war. And the war is already going. Who will give them these 5 years? But there are good news from Germany. Germany gave Ukraine 120 APCs Marder. These vehicles, part of them were purchased in Greece. 80 with spare parts were already transferred, and 40 were bought from Greece and also to be transferred. This is a serious number, right? Right, 120 APCs, that will be enough for us to fight this war for about 6 months. So 120 brigades, that's roughly 120 APCs, that's one brigade, one motorized brigade. Perhaps two if you do it wise. So for this biggest war since the Second World War in Europe, in order for us to be able to successfully conduct and maneuver, we need about 1,200 APCs a year on that length of a front line, maybe 3,000. This is the number that needs to be provided in order to successfully conduct this war. And 120, that is really about nothing. Even for the war that NATO did in Afghanistan, that's not enough. And this is the biggest war since the middle of the 20th century. And it started on purpose by Putin in the time when the West was with its pants down. 2 moral defeats in Iraq and Afghanistan, 1 war won with ISIS, not fully, but still. And lack of understanding what are they living for in the future, what are they fighting for, and not readiness to fight for their values. And now Israel is added to the war with Ukraine. And I would remind that in the last month, there were about 80 attacks on American military bases during the last month, right? We talked about that. And no actual response to that. Guyana, the only English-speaking country, British protectorate, so similar to Falkland Islands, that Thatcher waged war for. And it's millions, hundreds of millions of investments by Americans and European companies. Oil, a lot of resources from the chemical table of elements, and they're not even ready to fight for that. Now the West, we see the West that is not even eager to fight for the best resource they had, the oil, right? You know, war is very simple. One needs to take a rifle and go to a trench, be ready to shoot at the person from 10 to 5 yards at the person who is ready to kill you. Or sit there and hold the position in any conditions, including frost bites and winter when you lose fingers and all. So we have this power. We are fighting for our country. Russians also have this. They're fighting for things they poorly understand. They're just being sent to, but they're still dying. They're still ready to do that. What can the West do? Okay, tomahawks. They can destroy maybe half of Russia with tomahawks, but Russia will probably retaliate with nukes. And even if Russia doesn't, what will they do with hundreds of thousands of people with rifles who will come and ask for answers? Right? Imagine Russia has no tanks, no jets, and they just decide to pour across the border with rifle, with machine gun. What next? That's a good question, Alexei. I think there is an answer to what will be. In this case, Minister of Defense of Germany congratulated the planet with Christmas, including on Russian language. And they didn't include Ukrainian, right? No Ukrainian. And the phrase in Russian language sounded like this: with best wishes, we would like that by the end of the year, the world situation would be better. Regardless, we wish you and your families a lucky and restful time. Good luck and good night. Remember that, right? Yeah, we, of course, congratulate everybody who celebrates Christmas. And once again, I want to say it's only our Ukrainian soldiers are standing between the scenario where we are no more and when we still exist. They're biding us time till we maybe wake up and make all the right decisions. Only them. So my ask is, again, I remind you to please support the fundraiser under that stream. They're biding time for us to get wiser, to still make the right decisions. And we are putting the links to the Special Rifleman Battalion, fighting on a difficult area of the front. They're collecting for portable radio electronic interference systems. So they want to put one system like that on the medical evacuators. Medical evacs, they come to the front line, they pick the wounded soldiers, and this radioelectric interference thing will protect them from FPV and other land drones that Russians use. So this is very key collection, very important for this battalion, so please support that. Let's close it, and then we'll put another one from the line that we have under the video. I have a couple more questions, if you let me, Alexei. I'll try to be quick. One is about mobilization, how it was going on in Odessa. There was a story about medical transport, by the way. The Odessa conscription service people, they grabbed a person on the street, tried to take him to the recruitment center in a vehicle marked with a red cross, so marked as medical vehicle. A woman helped to let the guy free. She basically hung on the door till they let him out. And what's interesting is that organization UUF had a sticker on the back of this vehicle, and they're buying these vehicles for donations by people to supply hospitals close to the front line. So somehow this vehicle ended up being not on the front, but in possession of the Recruiting and Drafting Commission. How adequate it is, do you think? A strange way, right? If we really do the audit of what's happening, we'll look in the face of not even historic danger on the end of Ukrainian governance. We'll probably look in the face, in our own face, and we'll be horrified maybe by what we see. Because in the words, everybody is a patriot, but unfortunately, when people get a chance to appropriate something, to take something that's not theirs, it's a difficult choice for many. And then you find weird situations like the hospital vehicle that should be near the front line is actually way back in the middle of the country, getting people into the recruitment centers. So again, finishing this stream, I want to quote, not my own words, but Lyubomir Guzov, a real Ukrainian patriot who was speaking only Ukrainian most of his life, and who canonically dislikes Russia. I'm quoting him. Our main trouble is immorality, and everything else are consequences. Amen. Alexei, thank you for the stream. There are a lot more reasons to talk, and I think we're done for today's agenda. Right, we'll talk next week as well. Thank you for commenting and going deeper into all these signals that we get to Ukraine from the Western media. We're not inventing anything in this format. We're just reading through and quoting the words that are being published and discussed in the West. Yeah, so just a message for our viewers. We are not inventing here in this stream. We have chosen a way, an option where we just follow the titles and the publications of the Western media, and we're just providing commentary. The subjects are being injected by the other media sources. It's just you guys don't have access to them often, or you read maybe partly instead of reading them fully. So they're not big articles. You could actually exercise and do that, but we'll be helping. We'll be helping to wake up the collective brains. Thank you, everybody who watched us. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel of Alexei Arestovych, to Alpha Media, and to the privateer station if you are listening or watching that in English. Please join, become members, support if you can. And with this, have a quiet night. Goodbye.